Good afternoon and welcome. I am Robert Solomon and I serve as Vice President for the Office for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity here at Case Western Reserve University. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's lecture, which is our first Power of Diversity lecture for the spring semester and our National Power of Diversity lecture in our series. We are honored to have as our speaker this afternoon, political strategist and scholar, Donna Brazile. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for what is sure to be an engaging and insightful presentation. Donna Brazile's lecture today is one of many campus events being held this month as we celebrate Black History Month and continue to recognize the legacy and contributions of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Other activities planned include other lectures, panel discussions, and a poetry and vocal expression event. I invite you to visit the Case Western Reserve University homepage where you will find a listing of upcoming events and plan to join us at some future event. Now, I won't labor long, and so it is my great pleasure to turn our program over to our interim university president, Scott Cowan, who will introduce this afternoon's speaker.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to join you today to welcome and introduce today's Power of Diversity speaker, Donna Brazile. I can assure you, we are all in for a real treat today. Not only a mastermind, but she is also a gifted storyteller. Ms. Brazile will discuss a very timely and important topic, the impact of women on national politics, particularly given the increase of women in the States Congress following the November elections. She has devoted much of her life's work to bringing about progressive change and responsible governance, while also working for the advancement of people that is fair and equitable. Ms. Brazile is the former chair of the Democratic National Committee and has worked on numerous presidential campaigns. In 2000, Ms. Brazile became the first African to serve as the manager of a major party presidential campaign when she led former Vice President Al Gore's campaign. Ms. Brazile provides commentary on national political issues and is a news contributor for Fox News, ABC News, and CNN. Additional achievements including her 2004 best-selling memoir, Cooking with Grease, Stirring the Pots in Politics. Ms. Brazile also is co-author of the forthcoming book, For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Politics. Ms. Brazile is the recipient of numerous awards and honors. In 2013, President Obama appointed her to serve on the J. William Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Committee. She is also the recipient of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's highest award for political achievement. Ms. Brazile was named among the 100 most powerful women by Washington Magazine and among the top 50 women in America by Essence Magazine. Ms. Brazile 10 honorary doctoral degrees, including one from her alma mater, Louisiana State University. She's an academic scholar and currently serves as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University and Howard University. In addition to her political, scholarly, and media work, Ms. Brazile has found time in her busy schedule to also act, appearing on CBS's The Good Wife and BET's Being More. Ms. Brazile is the founder and director of Brazile and Associates LLC, a general consulting grassroots advocacy with her firm based in Washington, D.C. But what I like about her is something that we have in common, and that is New Orleans.
Amen.
Amen. Donna was born and raised in New Orleans, and as many of you know, that is a home for me as well as Cleveland. And she is a legend in New Orleans. I know she is in the country, but in New Orleans, she's an icon and a legend for what she's done for our community, what she's done for our country, for her good sense of humor, And as I said, you're in for a real treat. And we're just fortunate it's not a week from now, because it would be Mardi Gras and none of us would be here.
Absolutely.
But it's not Mardi Gras. But you know what? Today is Mardi Gras because Donna Brazile is with us. It's my pleasure to welcome her to Case Western Reserve University. Donna?
Well, thank you so much, Mr. President. And it's such a good honor to see you and to be with all of my good friends and the faculty and staff at Case Western Reserve College. A few years back, I had the great opportunity and honor to attend your campus. I gave a lecture on the law school campus, but I will never forget my many trips to the great state of Ohio. As some of you might know, that back during the day when we taught civics in our public schools and private schools, I had the opportunity to compete in a contest for Miss Ohio, and I actually won. Mr. Marchand's class in 5th grade inspired me to love the Buckeye State, to follow just about everything you do. And of course, I follow your football teams, and like my football team, the New Orleans Saints, we didn't make it to the Super Bowl, but you know what? We had fun trying. So good afternoon, and thank you all for allowing me to be part of this special program. The Power of Diversity Lecture Series is an opportunity for us to talk about and celebrate diversity in all of its forms. It's also a great honor to be with you during Black History Month. What started out as a week back in 1926 is now celebrated for the entire month. Historian Carter G. Woodson wanted us to focus not just on Black history, but also American history as well, because it's the history that we have created together. So let us use this period to rediscover our common history and shared values as American citizens, and to focus on how we can help shape the future. The power of diversity, of course, is a value, a concept that we should all embrace and accept. Diversity means having many voices represented. It means inclusion. It means bringing more people into the room. Diversity is not about shutting anyone out or asking anyone to leave the room. It's about urging and motivating others to essentially scoot over so that everyone can have a voice, especially now in this wonderful period that we're now living through. Inclusion means listening to others. Listening is diversity in action. And today I'm going to talk about a part of our history that often is ignored, because for too long we have ignored the contributions of women in American society. We have failed to understand how long it took for women to not only achieve the right to vote, but for women to finally get a seat at the table. And when I say this is a very important period in American life, I recognize that we have lost so many of our fellow citizens due to this global pandemic. But that should not stop us from surviving and thriving and celebrating the remarkable achievements we have all made as Americans. And yes, the election of our first female vice president in the history of our country has been a moment that I have been celebrating for a long time. And yes, while we have achieved it, our fight is not finished. I want to start by saying that as we look forward to the rest of this month, and of course, Women's History Month next month, it's important that we understand that the contributions of women is so important, so vital to our civic life, because these are women who have dared to make a difference, women who were not afraid to be marginalized and ridiculed, and yes, threatened, because they wanted to have their voices in the process. They wanted to help shape public policy. They wanted to help lead our nation. I've been very fortunate in my lifetime to have worked with so many remarkable women, so many phenomenal women, women who did stir the pots, women who did get out of line, and women who were not afraid to risk it all so that every woman, every young girl, every child, every human being, men included, could enjoy this great democracy. So many women inspired me as a young girl growing up in my beloved native South. So many who taught me how to get in the way, to start, as some of you heard from our friend who we lost last year, John Lewis, to get in good trouble by urging people to stand up and speak out. And today I want to share a little bit about their story. The reason why is because we need to know their journey. It's been a remarkable period of time. We need to understand that it's our turn, especially young people. Yes, it's your turn to make a difference. And why you? Because there's no one better. And why now? Because tomorrow is not soon enough. So get ready to take your seats at the table, because the barriers are still coming down. And we know that the bridge can be built and the ladder is not so daunting. It's your turn to climb. It's your turn to rise. It's your turn to soar, to seize the moment and opportunities to start remaking this world. Start now, starting today. And while our long fight for equality is not over, we know that we're on the path. And we're going to achieve that with your help and with your ability to get involved, to get in the way, and to be willing, as John Lewis inspired us, to get into good trouble. So as a woman, I have always believed that it was my birthright to serve. I believe that it was important to get involved and to try to make connections. I have to tell you, growing up in the South, my parents taught me to study hard, work hard, and to go outside each day, respect my neighbors and my friends, to listen to my teachers, and to grow up and try to shake things up. And so I want to talk about some of the women that long ago perhaps were inspired by their parents or their grandparents, or perhaps even their community, to try to remake this world, a world that would now see all of us in our diversity. So, Michael, I know you're going to help me with my slide presentation. Forgive me, folks, because I know how to use my internet very well. Al Gore taught me that. He inspired so much. But Michael is going to actually be the conductor, and I'm just going to call the shots. I guess I'll be in the train station waiting for the conductor, but he's going to conduct this slideshow. And so I've entitled this, and I'm going to take your questions. So please pay close attention, because this is about learning. This is about learning about the women. So often their stories are never told. And Kamala Harris didn't just arrive at the White House on January 20th because of one election. She arrived because women saw opportunities as far back as the 1700s. They knew that while they would be forgotten during the Constitutional Convention, they would never give up. There was a woman by the name of Sojourner Truth, born a slave in 1797. She was not only an evangelist, she was an abolitionist, she was a suffragist. She made statements to everyone that women deserved to be treated as equals, and yet her voice would never be listened to. She stirred so many pots, she got in the way. She even went to court to fight for her son after he was sold into slavery, saying that she deserved to keep her children intact. She won, something that was unheard of at the time. She wasn't the only one who was fighting. Let's go to the next slide. That moment at Seneca Falls in 1848, women decided that they too would begin to form their own declaration. It was called the Declaration of Sentiments. They wanted to have a statement that included the women, their political, their social, their cultural, their economic life. Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and so many others gathered at Seneca Falls in 1848. That was known as the turning point of the modern women's movement. And while Not all women could attend. Frederick Douglass, a man, was there, and he said, you need to include in your declaration or in your manifesto the right to vote, because without the right to vote, no other rights can be achieved. That was the beginning of coalition building that would eventually land us one day as powerful figures in American life. Next slide. And while some women, especially Black women and other indigenous women, could not participate, they understood that they had to light the candle and begin to organize. These women, the Black suffragists, they formed their own organizations. They understood that they had to demand their freedom as well. The racism of that era would not allow them to stand with their fellow white sisters, but they knew that they had to also fight for the right to vote. Next slide, please. Although they had to deal with a post-Reconstruction America that dealt with lynching, of course, the Depression, the plague, Jim Crow, these women were willing to fight. They were willing to do their domestic chores as well as get out in the world to fight for their freedom. It's important that we know their names, their organizations, the Black women who fought harder than ever before to achieve their rights, especially after the passage of the 15th Amendment that gave Black men the right to vote in certain places in the country, but Black women were still left behind along with white women. It would take a movement that involved all of these forces for us to figure out how we could serve as well. The National Association of Colored Women were founded in 1896, along with the National Women's Suffrage Association, the American Women's Suffrage Association. All of these groups took ordinary people and they made them extraordinary leaders, leaders that would pave the way of the future. Next slide, please. And so while there were the League of Women Voters, there were other activists, Alice Paul, there were members involved in so many organizations. The National Council of Negro Women and other organizations helped to not just address civil rights challenges, but also the challenges unique to women. And the reason why they wanted the right to vote is because they wanted to shape public policy. They wanted to be able to talk about the difficulties that women were facing in their daily lives. These women were working women, often unseen and unheard, and yet they could not fight for their wages. They could not fight to have a seat at the table. Next slide, please. The background of these women, and the reason why I like to always talk about them is because it's important to understand that it wasn't just white women who fought for the right to vote. It was also Black women who joined in coalition, believing that they too could march. They too could make this sacrifice because the vote was an essential ingredient in our democracy, and they understood that they needed it. I want to go to the 9th slide. I think that's the one involving, of course, Miss Rosa Parks. Because some people think that the modern civil rights movement started just a few years ago, but it started long, long ago. And it was women like Rosa Parks, who is known as the mother of the civil rights movement. It's the next slide, please. Sorry about that. Miss Parks, we had the great honor of bearing her in 2005. She was the first Black person to ever line state at the United States Capitol in the Rotunda. In 1955, on December 1st, Ms. Parks refused to give her seat up to a white man. She said, not only am I tired, I'm also tired of giving in. And so she sparked the Montgomery bus boycott led by a 26-year-old preacher from Atlanta, Martin Luther King. Rosa Parks' legacy to us was that women could dare to make a difference. And by sitting up, by sitting down, she allowed all of us to stand up for equality for all. Rosa Parks was not alone. and sparking this new movement. There was a woman who worked behind the scenes. Next slide, please. She was one of the key strategists. Long before we knew the names of the preachers, the Black men preachers, there was Ella Baker, one of the best political strategists. She helped SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She helped the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the NAACP. And yes, she was one of the backbones of the 1963 march with Bayard Rustin, helping to provide strategy and tactics to all of those who would serve. Next slide, please. Ella Baker is someone we should know, along with Dorothy Height, who's seated there next to Reverend Jesse Jackson, along with Diane Nash, and so many women who were not afraid, who went out and ensured that women would get that seat at the table, women would be on the front lines of civil rights and equality in this country. And without those heroines, we would not have made it this far in terms of the progress. They helped to hurry history. And when I tell their stories, I hope you understand they were ordinary women who believed that one person could make a difference. Next slide. Of course, they had to fight the forces of evil in this country. The Dixiecrats, comprised of Democratic Party leaders all throughout the South, they erected barriers that would make it even harder for those who gained the right to vote to participate in our electoral process. They made it difficult for Black women as well as Black men to cast their ballots. The poll tax. We've heard so many other voter intimidation, voter suppression tactics. But to overcome all of the obstacles and all of the barriers, it took another kind of leader. And next slide. She was from a small town in Mississippi, Fannie Lou Hamer. She demanded Lyndon Johnson give her a seat at the table, and she would not leave. She went to Atlantic City. She followed the Democrats. She went up to New Jersey and demanded a seat at the table. 1964. And when she stood up and testified and exposed not just the racism within the Democratic Party, but exposed the tactics that kept eligible citizens from participating, she opened up an entire new era for Black political leadership and women's leadership in the United States of America. Of course, what she did was she made it possible for this country to finally celebrate something that no one ever saw back in the days of Sojourner Truth, and that is, and I'll show you the next slide, please, the election of the first Black woman to serve in Congress. Oh, there's another slide, I'm sorry. That is Mrs. Coretta Scott King. And I like to include Mrs. Coretta Scott King because not only was she my mentor, my friend, but without her, we would not be celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday every year. Mrs. King was more than just a widow and more than just a bystander. She was actively involved in the civil rights movement. She had a stake in the outcome. She worked alongside Dr. Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy and so many others. She made the sacrifice. And without her heroic actions of pleading and lobbying and building coalitions, we would never have achieved a King holiday back in 1983, signed into law by Ronald Reagan in 1986. I know that history because I had an opportunity to work with Mrs. King and work on the legislation and the organizing that made Martin Luther King's birthday a national holiday. But with their efforts, Fannie Lou Hamer, Coretta Scott King, Rosa Parks, and so many other, Diane Nash, we finally got our first Black woman in Congress in 1968. Shirley Chisholm became the first Black woman elected to Congress, United States House of Representatives from the great state of New York. And by 1992, in the year of the woman, we got our first Black woman to ever be elected to the United States Senate, Carol Moseley Bryan from the great state of Illinois in 1992. Again, history. And let me just show you some more history. Next slide, Pat Harris. Pat Harris the first Black woman appointed to a cabinet. The first woman, of course, was appointed in 1933 by the great Franklin Roosevelt, Frances Perkins, to the Department of Labor, Pat Harris, Department of Health and Human Services. Pat Harris was appointed by a Southerner, Jimmy Carter. Again, a direct line of activism that followed the heroic actions of those who organized in the South, those who not only laid the foundations, but built the bridges. And Jimmy Carter, elected from the South with a large percentage of Black votes, appointed the first Black woman cabinet member. Now, Black women were not the only history makers during this period. We finally got the first Latina. Next slide, please. Ileana Ross Lathian, and the first Asian Pacific Islander, Patsy Mink. These are, again, examples. These women are examples of leaders who were willing to cultivate and do as Black women did and other women. And that is to fight for a seat at the table. That is to organize, to create the change in conditions that would allow their voices to be heard and allow them to have a seat at the table. And of course, by 2011, we got our first Latina as governor. Next slide, please. The amazing Susana Martinez from the great state of New Mexico. And like Ileana Ross Lathian, a Republican. So this is not just about Democrats, it's about Republican women as well. It's the struggle that we all had to fight for. I guess when it comes to the patriarchy of this society, there was a bipartisan, I guess, deal made between the men and women of both political parties to keep women out of the room, but we got in, and once we got in, we left the door open for others. And now everyone can make history. And I want to show you the kind of history we're making and the history we've made. Just look at the caliber of the women who are serving, women who have served. Next slide, please. The amazing Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State, the first Black woman appointed as Secretary of State. And of course, today, Deb Haaland, the first Native American woman who will become the Secretary of Interior. She has gone through a hearing. We're waiting for her confirmation. That's the next slide, please. Condi Rice, my good friend, and the amazing Deb Haaland, another good friend. History that we're still making in 2021. Again, the next slide, we've had well over 90 women now elected to statewide positions. When you look around the country today, we're still trying to elect more women. I wanted to just give an example of two, Gretchen Whitman from the great state of Michigan, and of course, Kate Brown from the great state of Oregon. We're still trying to put more women, and hopefully in 2022, Stacey Abrams will become the first Black woman elected as governor from the great state of Georgia. There's a lot of work to do, but we know based on the results that we saw this year, we will make that history as well. Now, more women can run, and in 2020, we proved that. We had the largest number, next slide please, Michael, that we had the largest number of women ever to run for office, to win their primaries. And now, for the first time in US history, we have more women. When I first went to Capitol Hill as an intern back in 1981, there were just a handful of women. I could count all 10 of them on my hands, 1 through 10. I actually knew them. I knew Bella Abzug. I knew Elizabeth Holtzman. I knew, of course, Shirley Chisholm and Cardis Collins and Barbara Jordan. I knew Marcy Kaptur. I knew Barbara Mikulski. Today, over 140 women. We have come a long way. And the number of women of color, Black women, Latina, Asian Pacific Islander women, women from all backgrounds, we've made this history together. There's still lots to be done. Next slide, please. Again, just to show you how far we've come, from a handful now to over 100. I mean, in fact, when they opened the doors of the Women's Caucus back in the 1990s, I was a Hill. By then, I'd become a staff director and a chief of staff. And what was once just a small room had to become almost like 2 whole floors to hold all of the women now in the Women's Caucus. So we've made tremendous progress. There's more progress to be made, and we can start making that progress now here in 2021. So next slide, please. The progress we need to make, of course, is that we have to continue to put women in the pipeline to lead. We have to continue to build the coalitions and to really train women to take their seats, to run for office, to understand the political process and not be intimidated by the process. We can do this, but we have to work together. And we have to identify those women who are willing to serve. Next slide, please. Because of course, the history that we want to make now, not just in this political cycle, in 2021, a Black woman running to be governor of the state of Virginia, a Black woman running for re-election in the great state of New Jersey, Sheila Oliver. There's more progress we can make. And I do believe that this progress will come faster over the next 10 years than the progress we saw that took more than 154 years. Lastly, I think there's two more slides. I'm sorry, Michael. Sorry about that. Somebody, all right. Here it is. I had to include these slides, of course, because of Jerry Ferraro. I had the great honor of working with, hold on a second. I'm on the phone. Okay, I'm turning off okay, sorry about that. I had to turn off the phone, folks. I had the great honor in 1984 working with Geraldine Ferraro, who became the first woman to be on a major party ticket. I had the great honor of being at the Republican convention when John McCain, of course, selected Sarah Palin back in 2008. And I was chair of the Democratic Party when Hillary Clinton became our nominee and selected Tim Kaine. And of course, I had the great honor as being the former chair of the party of recommending to Joe Biden, former vice president, now President Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, who's now our vice president. So I want to end by saying, we got one more slide, I believe. There we are. There it is. Yeah. And I had the great honor of being at the inaugural celebration. I was on the platform. I sat behind former President George Bush. I sat across from Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. And of course, I sat next to the poet Amanda Gorton. And in my eyesight, I could see Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama. So in this election cycle, women proved once again to be the most reliable voters. They're the ones who made this history, women voters, and especially Black women. 9 out of 10 Black women cast their ballots for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Latinas cast somewhere between 2/3 of their ballots for the Biden-Harris ticket. And we know that women made up the majority of the electorate. So this is the change that we have fought for. This is the change that we wanted to see. This is the type of diversity and inclusion we believe is necessary for a country like ours to be able to prosper and to be able to allow everyone to finally get their seats at the table. So I've shared with you my insights in terms of the power of diversity, the power of having women in the room, the power of women of color of changing the direction of this country and shaping the policies of the future. And of course, my ask is simple. We need more women to run for office. In fact, we need more young people to take their seats at the table, more young people to get excited about public service, more young people to raise their hands and say, I'm ready to serve. That's what we need. And my final slide is simple. Our journey has just started. We need to finish this fight. And I hope you join with me in making sure that the next generation is ready to serve, ready to lead, inspired by those who came before us, ready to lift up those who are still falling behind. This is your opportunity. Why you? As I said before, because there's no one better. Why now? Because tomorrow's not soon enough. So let's open it up for questions. I'm sure I'll give you a little bit of lagniappe. We call lagniappe a little bit of something more, something extra. I got some extra spice, some sauce, and who knows what might come out. But I'm open to hearing from you right now, and you're taking your questions and comments and anything else I can provide. I just also want to say to Mr. President, you mentioned that I've also been, I've played a role in Being Mary Jane, which is on BET, of course, The Good Wife, CBS, is, you can see it now, the reruns. I had 3 appearances. I played myself. The only problem with playing yourself is you have to tell a director that's not what Donna would do. But I've also participated in the House of Cards. I played myself in that, but after all these years in American politics, I'm probably best suited for the Game of Thrones, but it's no longer, I guess it's also in reruns or syndication. I love acting because it's like politics. You get to play yourself, and you get to really, you really get to experience what it's like to try to show people how interesting and how well-versed you are in this amazing life that we're now all going through. So with that, Ms. Hammock, I'm opening it up for questions. And by the way, I want to apologize for, this is my home office, and my other part of my house, I have to set that up for the impeachment, and there's a lot of bookshelves behind me, and I didn't want to be boring today. So this is the room where I come to write my lectures and do my classes. I also have my football room, but as you can imagine, when your team loses, you don't clean up after yourself. So next time we'll put you in one of my fancier rooms here in my boudoir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insight with us this afternoon. This has been an excellent lecture, just looking at the path and the road that women have taken in shaping our democracy and recognizing how far we can go, particularly when you think about diversity, and you're reminding us that part of that is having a seat at the table. As I have a friend who used to say that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So
on the menu.
Sure that we continue to have people on the tables, at the table. So thank you so much. And we're about to get questions. The questions, for people to have them, we want you to email them to OIDEO, and you should have received the instructions there at oidio@case.edu, and then they'll be fed through the chat process that we have here, and you'll get the instructions as they come through. And what I'll do is I'll ask a couple of questions to get things rolling, and then we'll keep moving from there. So that'll be it. So why don't I start with this question?
Hold on.
In light of everything that you've indicated, why do you think so many Americans, or it appears, seem to struggle with the impact of women, and particularly women of color, in our democracy? We still have some people who are struggling with that.
I think because in many ways, women have been defined more, we've been defined by our agenda. It's almost like we have to overcome these cultural stereotypes. First of all, that women can only serve as mothers. Women can only do domestic chores. If you think about the road that we've been on for the last 200 plus years, it's been a road to just prove that we're capable of leading, that we're capable, despite our biological differences, that we're capable of serving, that yes, women can lead, women can play decisive roles and helping to govern our society. But we've had to overcome so many cultural barriers, so many political barriers, and of course, so many society stereotypes that really demean women. And I think what you're seeing today, not only with the example of our Vice President, Kamala Harris, but also the Speaker of the House and women who are going to be serving in many prominent positions in our cabinets, women who are now part of our corporate boards, women who are in the media. I mean, it's time that we stop breaking the glass ceiling and instead just sweep away all of these harmful, what I call byproducts of another era. Women can serve. And we've seen in many of the European countries, even in the Middle East and in Africa, and of course, in the Caribbean, we've seen women serve, and South America, women have served. It's time for women in America to be seen as leaders. I think that is the big problem that we have faced as women in American politics.
Yeah, so we've proven, women have proven over time that they're able to lead as exceptionally as anyone else in our democracy.
And why use only half of the talent pool? And why not invest in the entire talent of the United States of America? You know, we are talented too. I mean, women can provide resources. So I can go through women in science, women in academia. You name the field, I can almost go through that same history. But when you think about the history of women, and especially women of color, for centuries, they were invisible. No one knew who Sojourner Truth. I mean, no one knew that Harriet Tubman was also a suffragette. I mean, pretty soon she will be on the $20 bill, and no one knew her past. No one knew her history. Yes, she's a runaway slave, but she did more than just run away from slavery. She helped others to obtain their freedom. And she was an abolitionist. She was one of the early signers, and she was a suffragette. She was there when they created the National Association of Colored Women Clubs. And so we need to know this history, because this is history we have all made. And this is history from the perspective of looking at the entire country and not just a small slice of the country.
Well, you know, today, many people view our political scene as being, you know, polarized, and there's a cynical view about it. How might women influence and change the nature and perception of national politics?
Well, you know, we've had our differences before. Of course, we had a civil war. So partisanship is nothing new. The question is can we operate in an era of divided government? And the answer is yes. I mean, women bring different styles of leadership. Women are more collaborative. Women believe in compromise. Women want to get things done. So I think if we can abide by that, I mean, just recently, we saw on Capitol Hill, the leader of the Appropriation Committee, Rosa DeLauro from the great state of Connecticut. She's reaching out to her Republican counterpart to say, okay, here's the American Rescue Plan. What's in it? And when people see the price tag, they get blown away and say, we can't afford that. But if you go item by item, and I saw her walk her colleagues item by item and saying, this is how we get the American people back on their feet. She didn't say my way or the highway. She said, let's go through this. And if there's something we disagree with, let's spell it out. But here are the items. So I think there are ways in which, even in an era of deep partisanship, that we can bring people together. After all, during the 60s and the civil rights movement, Lyndon Johnson didn't have the votes from all of the Democrats. He had to reach out and get the Republicans. And if you look at every major piece of legislation that is passed in the 20th and the 21st century, we've taken a little bit of your spice, added a little bit of my spice, and that's what makes a gumbo. We're adding spices. We're not throwing things away. We're putting things in together. And that's why we call it a roux, because it brings everything together and it's delicious once it's served. Bring in the roux, bring in the spices, and let's make gumbo.
That sounds great. Well, here's a great question. What, and this comes from our chat, what can men do to support the fight for more women in office?
We need men as allies. After all, it was Harry Burns. Harry Burns was a 22-year-old lawmaker from the great state of Tennessee. When he was newly elected, and he received a letter from his mother on the day of the vote. On the day of the vote back in August of 1918, and it was reading that letter, put the rat in ratification. He voted yes. He changed his vote. He was going to be a no vote. He voted yes. So listen to your mother, and voted yes. And because of his leadership, Remember, it took 144 years. And the campaign to achieve the right to vote was achieved because we had men as allies. Women had to appeal to men. Women had to make the case to men. And yes, it was men who ultimately voted to give us the right to vote. So we continue to need men as allies and coalition. And I mentioned Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass attended the Seneca Fall Convention. And when Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott and everybody was putting together the final paper, it was Frederick Douglass who raised his voice and said the right to vote. You have to include it. So we need the coalition. We need men as allies. And remember, we can all share the same table. We're not asking anybody to leave the room. We don't want no one to leave the room. I often tell people as a Black woman, I don't want anybody to leave the room. I don't want a white man to leave the room. I don't want a white woman or a Hispanic or Asian. I don't want a gay person or a straight person. I don't want a Baptist because I'm Catholic. Everybody stay in the room. There's no harm in having everybody in the room. That's what makes America strong. When my dad integrated one of the few men back in the 1950s for the Korean War, he went to war with, for the first time, he went to war with white men. He didn't know. He said, I had no idea. I'll never forget when my dad would talk about spending 18 months in the hills of Korea. He said, I didn't know what they liked. I didn't know what they disliked. But when we started talking sports, I found out that they watch baseball, that they like, basketball. He found something in common with the men that he was serving next to. And he also found out that they were just American boys. And so we often don't know people because we don't see them. And visibility is viability. When we see people, we understand that, we probably have more in common than we have our differences. So I'm not afraid of bipartisanship. And by the way, I went to the presidential inaugural with my congressman, my home state congressman, Steve Scalise. He's part of the House Republican leadership, number two, I'm sorry. He's number two after Cameron McCarthy and then Liz Cheney. And, I didn't have a ticket from my Democrats. The Democrats, they're like, let me change that. I had a ticket, but it was down Pennsylvania Avenue. And unless I brought my glasses and some binoculars, I would not be able to see the action. And so Steve Scalise offered me a ticket and I grabbed it. And my family said, you going with a Republican? I said, you know what? I'll go with a Republican, okay? And Steve and I had big fun. Steve knew people I didn't know. And I'll never forget when George W. Bush showed up on the platform, I went over to him and we were doing the little elbow bump. He said, how you know the president? I said, I spent 3 years after Hurricane Katrina going over to the White House every day almost, asking the president to help the people of the Gulf Coast, help the people of Louisiana. So it's important that we don't allow this partisanship to poison the well. We need each other. We need to work together.
Thank you. Well, here's a different perspective that comes from our chat, and it's two parts. So I'll give it to you. What was the campaign like behind the scenes? And can you comment on what the past 4 years has meant to you as not only a Black woman, but as a political insider?
Well, the campaign behind the scene is always interesting. That's the best way of saying it. When you wake up every morning in a campaign, you don't know the storyline, you don't know the narrative, you have to help create it, you have to help shape it. This was a different campaign because we couldn't actually go out there and campaign in person. We had to campaign virtually. So that was different. Typically, I traveled to states like Ohio multiple times. 34, 35 states each election cycle, even in the midterm. This time, I basically got up in the morning and I Zoomed and I went to bed at midnight Zooming, sometime past midnight because I often Zoomed into the night into Alaska, Hawaii, and other places. So it was different to campaign during COVID, but there's no question that the heart of American politics is being able to meet people where they are, where they live, where they eat, where they play, and where they pray, and to interact and to talk about the ideas of the campaign. I enjoy politics. I have to tell you, I've worked on, Mr. Solomon, I've worked on 7 presidential campaigns, 55 congressional, that's House and Senate, 19 state and local campaigns. I've campaigned in 49 states, one more state I'm going to become Miss USA without the bikini. And I'm looking forward to the day when I can go to Montana. Hopefully it's not in the winter because let's just say all of my winter clothing don't have that much. But if I get a chance to go to Montana, that'll be my 50th state. What I enjoy most is the opportunity to meet people, to recruit new people to run for office and to urge them to run, help them with the fundraising, their fundraising tactics and strategy, the media strategy. But the most important thing is I say, go to the people. This is about the people. Don't just go and get political endorsements, go directly to the people. And that's the winning ingredient in American politics, talk to the people.
Yes, thank you. Now here's a question that comes from the chat that really talks about the balance that's necessary. And so the question says that the double bind refers to the oppressive expectations that women leaders must be feminine, but not too soft, bold, but not too aggressive. What is an example of women leaders overcoming this and how so? So if you could pick out a couple of great examples of those who seem to have mastered this challenge of dealing with the double bind.
I mean, look, go back to Hillary Clinton. And the reason why I think Hillary Clinton should be a lesson for all of us is that when she campaigned, people complained about the sound of her voice. They say it sounded like she crackles. When Kamala Harris was campaigning for the presidency before she dropped out, people talked about, well, she smiles too much. Why is it that women have to look a certain way? Why is it that people pick on our hair or our clothing and not the power of our ideas and our example? And so, yes, the double bind is real. There's misogyny in the media. I mean, most reporters cover politics as if it's a sport. It's like Jane hit Joe, or Joe hit Jane, or Joe slammed this, and not talking about it, in ways that the average person understand that Jane's ideas is to bring more people into the room so that she can grow the business or grow the economy. And Joe, would like to exclude or not bring us. I mean, you can talk about ideas in ways that don't demonize people. Yeah, but the double bind is real because we often treat women candidates differently. And we have not overcome some of these problems. I just want to be judged, as Dr. King said, by the content of my character, not my hairstyle. God knows with this gray, by the way, is uniform now. I'll call myself the Silver Fox because I'm on Fox TV, but I want to be judged by my character, by my work. And the double bind, it's time that we explore other ways in which to characterize how women look, how they sound, how they dress, and how they operate in the public sphere.
Thank you. Now here's one from the audience. It says that, hi, my name is Tindo, and I was wondering what your biggest motivation was and how did you overcome challenges at a young age? So going back to, your beginnings, what motivated you?
I grew up at a time the country was changing. I mean, the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated, my grandmother called us in the room and all our births, Cheryl, Sheila, Donna, Katie, Chet, Lisa, Dimitri, Kevin, Zilla. Did I tell you I was Catholic? And my grandmother wanted us to read the Bible and pray for Dr. King, pray for his family. But my grandmother did one thing that shocked me. And I'm sure it shocked my other siblings, but she said we had to pray for whoever did it. And I was like, whoa, no, And you couldn't talk back to your grandmother for obvious reasons. Not only did they punish you, but secondly, she cooked the best buttermilk biscuits. And I did not want to be punished when them biscuits came out the oven the next day. And so what motivated me as a child is that I saw men and women like my parents and my grandparents who struggled to get the right to vote. I saw them stand in long lines only to be told that they were not registered when in fact they were registered. I saw them register again and again and again and again. And it motivated me as a child, especially after Dr. King was assassinated. It motivated me to get involved. And I'll never forget when I told my mom I wanted to be a civil rights worker. Now, mind you, I told my mom I wanted to be a priest, and she said, well, you're a girl. I'm like, well, what difference does that make? There are women in the Bible, but my mother kept telling me what I could and could not do. But I knew if I told I wanted to be a civil rights worker, because I wanted to finish what Dr. King and so many others had started. That motivated me to grow up in the segregated Deep South, to see those train tracks. There was one set that divided Black people from white people, and there was another set that divided the poor from the so-called well-off, because I don't think anybody was rich back then, but they were well off. And so we grew up so close to the river, Mississippi River, that every time it rained, we had waterfront property because we flooded. And so all of those factors led me to want to serve my country, to serve my community, and to give back. You know, the Bible says, to whom much is given, much is required. And as a young girl, I wanted to give back as much as I possibly could.
Thank you. And actually, the next question really ties into it. First, the questioner says, thank you for your time and expertise. And I certainly join that sentiment. But the question is, what keeps you going daily and what gives you hope in the midst of hardships? And so let's bring it to today. What keeps you going daily and what gives you hope in the midst of hardships? Because
I know God didn't bring us this far to leave us. My faith in God, my faith in humanity. I also know that as a child who grew up in poverty, that there are millions of our citizens who live on the outskirts of hope. And it's my desire, my dream to see as many Americans get back to the circle of opportunity. By serving, I can help to make a difference by being willing to be involved in the political process. I have already seen in my lifetime a young kid from the Deep South. My mother was a maid, my father was a janitor. Although he received 4 Bronze Stars for his heroic actions during the Korean War, he came back and he had to sit in the back of the bus and be called a boy, and yet he was brave. They taught me so much. I wanted to do well in my life because I wanted to honor their sacrifice. And today there are parents like my own, and there are people like the folks I grew up with. And I try to use my voice and my power to help them. And so it makes a difference. It makes a difference to me that I'm still active, that I still want to create the change. And yes, I'm very excited that we have a woman as vice president. And you know what I said back in 2009? I was on the platform also for Barack Obama, but I was sitting close to the top. I had to put on my glasses to see Barack take the oath. With Kamala, I was right there. With Joe, I was right there. So you know, I'm gonna live long enough. I've gotten from the steps to the platform. You know, I'm gonna live long enough to see her the first woman. I'm just saying it. I don't care whoever, whatever. I'm going all the way. I got on my knees that next day after Barack Obama was elected. I said, God, I always pray. I'm a praying warrior. I said, God, I'm gonna live long enough to see the first woman. I'm gonna live long enough to see the first Hispanic, the first Muslim, the first Jewish, the first openly gay. Doesn't matter who you are. I'm gonna live long enough to see it. And you know what? It may take a little long. I may have to live to be 90 something or even 100, but I'm gonna keep fighting because it's worth it. This is the greatest country on the earth. I've traveled all over this world, and this is a place I call home. I love America, I love Americans, and I know we're going to see that day. That door is open now. We put a woman in the White House. We're gonna put everybody one day. We don't have to exclude anybody. We're gonna put everybody's gonna get a chance to sit at the table. Yes. And just get ready. Here come the gumbo. You bring your spice, I bring my spice, we stir it up, we make the roux, that's gumbo. Big difference. We're gonna make this happen. I'm ready.
I'm glad you're claiming it. I'm glad you're claiming it.
I'm claiming it. It's gonna happen in my lifetime. I'm not even worried about it no more. It's happening now. As we speak, there's a young boy, a young girl today who's thinking about running for office. There's a young boy, a young girl who may not see themselves right now represented in the leadership, but one day they will be. It's gonna happen. When Mrs. King asked me, when I was 20 years old, she said, will you come to Washington when you graduate to help us with the King holiday? I said, I got nothing better to do. Of course, I had a job, had to explain to my mother why I wasn't going to Ohio to work with Procter & Gamble. That's how much I loved Ohio. I had a job offer in Cincinnati. And I said, I'll be there in 2 years. Give me 2 years. And you know what? In 2 years, we got the holiday, but unfortunately I changed my mind. And then I went to work for Jesse Jackson because I wanted to make him president. So I'm gonna keep fighting. I love it. I believe in hope. I believe in change.
Hear, hear. Let's think about another question we have here that really centers us on our current crises, right? Because that's what we're dealing with. So this first question is, how do you explain the role of women in the insurrection? Because we know that there were certainly women who participated in that.
Well, I'll never forget January 6, 2021, as long as I live. I was actually in this room seated. This was my Fox studio. Behind me, there's a camera, and it's a Fox News camera. And as I was sitting there at 1:24, waiting to go on, and on the split screen, I saw all of these people run toward Pennsylvania Avenue. I'm like, Now, they had a permit for the ellipse, which is part of the White House. It's the ground between the White House and the Washington Monument. They did not have a permit for the United States Capitol. And so when I saw that occurring, I kept saying, wait, where are they going? And when they arrived at the Capitol, the rally was still going on. And then here was the march. And I said, oh my God, they're gonna break down the barriers. There were men and women breaking down that barriers. For those of us who are district residents, all 700,000 of us, we were trapped in our homes. We were placed under curfew. We were told we could not leave our homes. The police from Maryland and Virginia had to come and protect us because the National Guard would not show up because the president or someone at the Pentagon would not allow the DC National Guard. We're not a state, we're a territory, we're the district, and we had to depend on the municipalities close to us and the states next to us, just to be protected as American citizens. No American should fear his or her own life by those who disagree with the election results. And so I was very disappointed, not just in former President Donald Trump, but all of those who believed in the lie, who believed in the lie. The voters made the decision. They gave Joe Biden and Kamala Harris their votes. Donald Trump lost the votes. I mean, I remember that night when Al Gore called me back in, I guess, 2000, December 12th, if memory served me right. And Al Gore said to me, immediately after the Supreme Court had ruled in Bush v. Gore, he said, shut it down. And I'm, what do you mean? He said, shut it down. And I said, sir, he said, shut it down. He told me to shut the operation down. The election was over. That never occurred. Instead, it kept building and building and building as if there was, a reason to come to Washington to shut down the Electoral College meeting that day in Washington, D.C. So I'm very disappointed. Yes, they deserve to be held accountable for their actions. And I hope that the United States Senate, after reviewing all of the evidence, will come to that conclusion. I know they're arguing about the process, whether or not, the former president had due process, but why don't someone pick up the microphone and argue on behalf of the residents of the District of Columbia? We don't even have a vote in the United States Senate, yet we're taxpaying Americans. We don't even have a vote in the House of Representatives. And they invaded our city. And for days, we could not move about. And many of us were afraid. What were we afraid of? We were afraid of citizens coming to our district with guns and knives, under the pretense that they were trying to stop the steal. Stop the steal of what? So I was very disappointed, not just in some of the comments that we heard, but I was also disappointed in the actions of those who we hire as our elected officials to represent us and these institutions in our democracy. Very disappointed. And I hope, like I said, that they're all held accountable.
Yes, yes. So as former chair of the DNC, what role does the Democratic Party have in reaching out to the right to further the cause of unity in our country?
I think we all have a responsibility to try to find common ground. We're not trying to convert anybody. I don't think Republicans have ever tried to convert me and vice versa. I'm not asking you to, to join my party. I'm asking you to respect the values of my party. I understand what conservatism means. I understand what progressive policies mean. I don't demonize people on the left simply because they want to raise the wage to $15, nor do I demonize those on the right who want to cut, and conserve. I believe we can find common ground. If you don't believe in $15 an hour, fine. What's the difference between 7 and 15? Let's get to $12 an hour. People, you cannot live on $7.25. I have a sister, she's number 6, who works 2 jobs, 2 minimum wage jobs to make ends meet. Now, Lisa did not finish high school, nor did she go to college, and yet she's smart enough to know how to, earn enough to buy a house and pay her bills. But she shouldn't have to work 2 jobs like that, simply because she cannot find one job that will pay her a living wage. We all know, I went to the grocery store the other day, when there's the threat of snow in DC, we all go and get our milk and eggs and wine and bread and some other things that we like to do. And I got to the grocery store and I said, woo, and this wasn't Whole Foods. This was a Trader Joe type of store. And a dozen of eggs were $3.99. I said, wow. Now typically I don't do eggs, but the reason why is because I promised young Pierre and all his friends, these are like 5, 7, 8-year-old kids, right? And they live in my neighborhood. They come in, they try to shovel my snow. These little kids, right? No grown person want to come and make $20 for the kids. So I said, I'll make them some cheese, cornbread, and some chili. And I went to the grocery. I was shocked. How can people afford this? I ask myself that all the time. The price of gas, a gallon of milk, a dozen of eggs. How do you afford that making $7.25 an hour? And yet the people who are checking us out often are those who are making $7.25 an hour. I mean, why not treat people with some decency and respect? So I'm not telling you that I'm a liberal. I'm not. I believe I'm more of a moderate. I'm more of a center left than the center right, but I have respect for my colleagues on the right, especially if they're principled. But I have no respect for people who, cause havoc and stop progress simply because they don't like the politics of the left or the politics of the right. We're bigger than that. It's time that we begin to respect one another.
Here's another question, and you may have alluded to this before, but this question is, what special role do or should prominent women politicians and activists have in healing the political discourse in our country today?
A few years ago, when we were on the verge of a budgetary cliff, they used to call them the cliff, another continuing resolution to kick it down the can because Congress can't get its act together. And, often when that occurs, it's a group of women lawmakers in the Senate. It's Susan Collins and Patty Murray, Susan from Maine, Patty Murray from the great state of Washington State. And they often, these two, Maine, Washington State, and they sit down, they hammer through a compromise. I think it's important that we try to figure out how to hammer through a compromise. We shouldn't let our government shut down. We shouldn't stop paying our bills because we're having political problems. And so often when you see the Gang of 7 or the Gang of 8, I don't know why they call them gangs, but yes, you often see that there are women involved in those discussions because they know women will often, pick up their pocketbooks or pick up their cell phone and say, hey girl, let's go over. Let's carve this out. We need to do that. I don't see why we shouldn't be able to do that. Nancy Pelosi, I've known Speaker Pelosi since the 1980s. She was former chair of the California Democratic Party. I remember when she replaced Sally Burton, the former congresswoman who died of cancer. I remember when she came to Capitol Hill. I remember the leadership assignments she took. She took on some of the toughest assignments inside the Democratic Party, but she understood that she had to climb the political ladder in order to reach the top. Women have climbed the ladder, and we're now in a position to meet whoever, whether it's other women from the other political party or even men within our own political structures, so that we can make the progress. And I think we need to, it's public service. I mean, when I was a Capitol Hill staffer, and I would walk into a room and I kept saying, well, you know what? These index cards belong to the American people. This pencil, this pen belong to the American people. And I treated whether it was the paper, the pencil that I worked at the desk or whatever, I treated it with respect because this belongs. I work for the American people. They work for us. We hired them. And it's time that we the people, take control over the political discourse of this country and not allow the politicians to ruin our great work that we've all done simply because they can't get along. They can get along. They can make compromise. Trust me.
It's absolutely. Now here's a question that really relates to some of the obstacles we see. And so our questioner says that political violence against women has been prominent in past years, notably the experiences of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib on the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, and the attempted kidnapping of Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan in 2020 really are incredibly worrisome, of course. So what changes are necessary really in our society, and this is certainly a broad question, in our society to encourage more women to run for office and once elected to be able to serve without having fear for their lives?
Well, first of all, I think we need to return to civility in American life, American political life. If we had a return to civility, then we would not see the kind of rhetoric and the kind of actions that we have witnessed over the last couple of years. And by the way, this didn't start with the former president. This has been part of our political discourse. I mean, these waters were muddy long time ago. Some people bring it all the way back to Ronald Reagan. Some people bring it all the way further back. But let me just say this. We spend billions of dollars each year, each political year, demonizing the other side. Not simply because of their ideas, sometimes because of the way they look. Sometimes we create all these false equivalencies in order to justify our actions. There's no justification for violence in our society. We should condemn all forms of violence. And we should be eager to allow everyone to be able to serve and to be able to hold positions of leadership without the threats of violence. I can tell you this as somebody who is I call myself a quasi public official, because when folks see you on television, do you know the number of people who think I'm a lawyer? I say, no, I went to law school, but I do play one on TV from time to time. I'm not a lawyer. Yet sometimes people see me. I have gotten so many hateful, nasty vitriol. When I was Al Gore's campaign manager in Tennessee, I had open death threats. People like, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to hang you. I'm going to shoot you. And, at first I'm like, oh, that's some freak. And then I realized, wait, I'm in Tennessee. This is where Dr. King was murdered. Let me take appropriate actions to ensure my safety and the safety of my staff. And when I became chair of the DNC, again, the vitriol, the threats of violence. And there were many nights when I had to leave that building with a security guard, making sure that I got home safely, or a driver to pick me up from the airport to make sure I got to my house safely. I had to endure death threats. I had, and at the DNC, we had multiple devices that were stationed near us. I mean, this type of violence and intimidation has no place in our democracy, and yet people believe that they have to resort to these dangerous tactics because they are not being heard. That's why I say we need to hear from everybody. We should not demonize each other. Look, I may not share a lot in common with somebody, from another state or another region or even another political party, but you know what? I often tell people I may not know a lot about your background or your past, but I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to be respectful. I mean, why not? We're Americans. When I was watching the Saints, course, they lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, they beat them twice in the, you know what? I'm sitting around my living room by myself because during this pandemic, you know, I couldn't go to a party, and God knows I wanted to have a party. Have you ever made a whole batch of jambalaya and you're sitting there saying, if I eat all of this, I'm gonna look like the state of you know what? And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, but I'm screaming. And you know what? I went on a chat room with folks from, you know, from Louisiana who were living all over the country. And all we were doing was screaming at each other. I can't believe he dropped that ball. I can't believe he couldn't do another yard. What's wrong with Drews today? Is his ribs cracked? You know, and I'm like, Jesus, look at these guys. I'm in a chat room with a bunch of strange people, but I had fun. We didn't talk politics. Of course, we didn't talk religion. All we talked about is, what did you put in your jambalaya? You had shrimp or just made andouille? Or did you add anything else? Oh, yes. We talk about our crab dip because, you know, Louisianans, we have 4 seasons: shrimp, crab, crawfish, and oysters. And we were just talking about that. And of course, I was talking about the wine that goes with everything. We're Americans. And yes, we do fight, whether it's 4 quarters in a football game or whether it's 4 years, every 4 years for the presidential race. But we should be able to come together and find common ground. I mean, at one point, sitting on the presidential platform on January 20th, George W. Bush walked up to me. I mean, I told you we already did the elbow bump, and he just grabbed me. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm sure somebody on national TV gonna see this. But the way he grabbed me, I grabbed him back. You know? Yeah, boo, I miss you. Because I got to know the man, the person, as well as the president. And for 3 years, we got to know each other as human beings. I would go and sit in the White House. They would have to come and knock and say, what are y'all talking about? Because after I told him we had to rebuild the levees, and after I told him we had to open up the schools, and we needed a new hospital because Charity was down. I was born at Charity Hospital. Then it got really good because then he would say, well, what are you coming in for today? I said, you know, the VA hospital needs to be built too, rebuilt. And we just got to talking. I had more in common with him. And, you know, when Ellen DeGeneres went to the football game with George Bush a few years ago, people got all upset. Why are you with George Bush? Why are you sitting down? I'm like, really? They're just watching football. I mean, come on. But we got to stop this. This is part of respect. We got to respect each other. We got to understand that our differences, the fact that we come from different places, we speak different languages, we have different accents. Like I said, some people cook their gumbo with chicken. Some people cook it with andouille sausage. Some people like to put it all in the bowl, okay? I mean, that's why we are Americans. I love that part of us.
Yes. Thank you. You know, we could probably continue talking all night, but we are out of time. And we're so thankful to you for reminding us the importance of everyone having a seat at the table and the invaluable contribution that women have made as you've traveled this journey to be around the table and to work together. And I know that most people are on live stream, but if you could just in your own space, we want to give Donna Brazile just a standing ovation and for allowing us to sit around your table. We're missing that gumbo, but we're happy to sit around the table.
Look, my gumbo is world famous. Anybody can make gumbo. Gumbo is not soup because it involves a root. That's how you keep it all together. And if you want my recipe, I will make sure I share with you. I got it from my mama. My mama got it from her grandmother. I mean, we will show you how to cook with grease. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with gumbo. Y'all get cold up there, get some gumbo. I guarantee you it will make you get up in the morning. You'll study if you're a student. If you're not a student, if you're a professor like me, your heart will be so warm. You will be out there talking all day to your future leaders. And I just want to go back and say something I said earlier. And I believe this. Why you? Because there's no one better. Why now? Because tomorrow is not soon enough. This is your turn to lead, to seize the moment. If no one has invited you to come into the room or asked you to participate, well, then this is an open invitation from Donna Brazile. Take time to focus on your future and the future needs of our country. We need more young people who are willing to serve. Stop complaining about who you like and who you dislike and what you don't want, and start acting as if you can do something. It takes one person. Think about Sojourner Truth, fighting for her boy, because she did not want her children split up. Think about Rosa Parks, who said that I was just tired of giving into a system that I knew was wrong. Think about Fannie Lou Hamer, who made that trip just to plead her case to the party that she wanted a seat at the table. And think about Shirley Chisholm, how lonely it must have been when she walked into the Congress by herself and no one looked like her. And today, Kamala Harris, the 49th Vice President of the United States, a Black woman of South Asian descent. That's the history we've made together. So there's much more history to be made, and I look forward to making history with all of you, and some gumbo too.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For tuning in, for participating in our National Power Diversity lecture with Donna Brazile. And we're going to say, have a great rest of your evening.